Yu-Gi-Oh is a complex and advanced game. Long gone are the days of beatdown strategies, and arrived have the days of Bible pages as card text. And as much as we are fine with this development, a specific thing is slowly eating away at the core foundation of this game. And the worst part, most of us don't even know it. What it is and what we can do to subvert this crisis is coming up next. And with that, welcome back to Skip Turn Yugioh. I'm your host Marvin, and today we have something very important to discuss. Because in recent times, I've gotten increasingly more aware of where my games take a U-turn. Have you heard of Microsharking? No? Well, I don't blame you. It's kind of an inside joke from me and my friend group, and I haven't heard it anywhere else. But the name fits perfectly and has some real-world applications to it. So let's explain it. In modern Yu-Gi-Oh, rules, text, and game states are as complicated as they can be. I bet every one of us had dozens of these situations in the past where all of our knowledge we think we have gets completely shattered, be it with a judge call or via a very friendly opponent that tells us something that we used to believe is absolutely false. An example I would give of myself is with Imperm. Would you believe me if I told you I played this card for about 4,000 times in the past year, and only a month ago I learned it only negated the spell and trap zone of the column it was set in, not the monsters? I know, it's a revelation, and pretty obvious for you probably, but I know deep down you have had similar situations where you thought, no way I didn't know that, or misremembered it. This is where Microsharking comes in. The term sharking itself describes an illegal action that is used to further the game state in one person's direction. An example of that would be running down the clock, drawing 6 cards for turn, or most commonly activating or resolving an effect or summoning condition wrongfully. Now you may think Microsharking is just sharking, but to a smaller degree, to which I would say, well, you're right. I jest. While sharking is often connected to a deliberate action and can be both called out or caught, microsharking is something that happens a lot more subtle and often without any ill will. Let me give you a few examples. At which point of the combo is Dragonlink locked into darks? How many Destiny heroes do we need in the graveyard for Dark Angel to hit the board? And are all Rescue Ace back rows once per turn? Did you know every single answer? Yes? Oh, well done then. Good thing that there are a million more things to know about Yu-Gi-Oh! And interactions that only come up in 1 in 1,000 matches. Would be a shame if someone took advantage of that, right? As much as we would like to pretend we are perfectly knowledgeable about the game and we know the ins and outs to every single deck and strategy, most of us aren't. And this can cause us to fall victim to 1 or 2 wrong game states a match even. Microsharks are small things like missing a restriction or misreading an effect, and suddenly one player loses advantage or even an entire game, which, if you ask me, happens a lot. I would even go as far as say for mediocre players with limited amounts of time, such as me, this happens every other match. But why do I think this is so much of a problem, and which factors may benefit the struggle? Like I said, the average player will run into microsharking a lot. And one of the main reasons for it is just missing knowledge, basically. If we all could remember every effect at any time perfectly, this obviously wouldn't be an issue. But think back to your last locals or regional event. Maybe you dodged them, but one of your mates or acquaintances did play against them for sure. The rogue players. The people that play the wildest brew west side of the kingdom of the duelist. Be it some weird pendulum deck or some long forgotten strategy that never cut it and was used to fill the packs of a core set with the obligatory 9 cards. As someone who frequently runs into these people, a few problems arise in terms of microsharking. Mainly, you only have a certain amount of time in the round. They always take a gazillion years for their turn, because mostly it's some balls to the walls combo deck. And thirdly, and most importantly, I pretty much won't know a single engine card by heart. Yeah, sure, I may have a hunch on what their strategy is trying to achieve, but do you really know what Battling Boxer Big Bandage does? Like truly and completely. I don't, and that's the problem. In a situation where I neither have the knowledge of all cards, nor the time to read them, I am kind of dependent on my opponent not taking the piss. From my experience, lots of you will think this is less of an issue than it actually is. I mean, sure, you will have to read the cards of the occasional rogue player, but most people play good and popular decks at big events, right? And at least those should be known. But let's take a step back and look what I said in the beginning. An uncontested claim is that Yu-Gi-Oh only gets more complicated with time. As more and more cards with new mechanics get added, the mental capacity you need to know every single thing by heart gets increasingly more impossible. It's not as easy anymore to just know everything, especially if you are joining the game right now. The rate at which the game moves forward is massive. New decks emerge every few months, with old decks becoming viable again, and while variety is one of the strong suits of competitive Yu-Gi-Oh, it unfortunately means more and more work to not get sharked. So in the end, it's not only about not getting microsharked by decks you have never seen before, but at the same time still knowing the decks you should be familiar with gets increasingly more problematic. Since the influx of information is so heavy, it's just not an easy task anymore at all. But let's look at some of the examples I recently played. In this example, I played Pearly versus Branded, and I remove a fusion monster from the side of my opponent's field. Without having anything to target, the Aluber shouldn't be able to return here, but because my opponent either doesn't know or didn't want to tell me, we still got the Reborn. Of course, I blanked at that completely as well, and instead of reading Aluber, I was just sure the game state was in a correct spot. You see what I mean? These small interactions are often secondary characteristics to a card. That's what makes it so hard to catch it. These microsharks may not be as bad as drawing 6 or completely rearranging the effect of a card, but they do accumulate over time into an advantage that's pretty substantial. So is every misplay a microshark, you may ask? Well, it depends. If it gives the player doing it a real advantage, I would say yes. Because truly knowing when to ascribe a deliberate cheat to someone is pretty much impossible. So you kind of have to go with your feeling or find a term that includes everything. While a shark in the more common sense is never a simple misplay, microsharks can be small details that benefit one player. I don't feel like it is an overstatement to say that microsharking is amongst the biggest problems in current Yu-Gi-Oh! And yes, I am coping a bit on my own losses. Leave me alone. Some may argue that it's only a problem of bad players, but even in the final of the latest YCS, the opponent, Turika, had to read the cards. So I think it is safe to say, for most it is impossible to know everything and to avoid microsharking completely. The only question remaining is, can we do something about it? Solving microsharking is a tall task. The main reason for that is that IRL gaming includes the biggest proponent of this problem: human error. We already established that memory is kind of a weird thing. You can be super sure you're doing something right until someone tells you that you're wrong. So as long as there are human players which can both not catch a microshark or microshark by accident, it will pretty much always be existent. But there are certainly measures which could help. Firstly, Konami would need to release a real TCG simulator. The problem of microsharking doesn't exist in Master Duel, for example, because effects are programmed in the game and indicators tell you when an action is legal or illegal. While this solves the problem virtually, it is like learning to ride a bike with training wheels. Doing it at first is great and helpful, but if you never learn to ride without them, you'll just fall flat on your nose when trying to ride a normal bike. At the moment, players of the real-life trading card game are reliant on simulators like Duelingbook, and that platform has a lot of problems on its own. That's why making competitive play more mainstream and creating a simulator from Konami would be a gigantic step forward. Just giving players the mainstream opportunity to learn the game in a more sustainable way may just be the best protection we have against microsharking. Additionally, it may also help to be less naturally trusty towards your opponents. Having the mindset that microsharks are very common and happen every other match may increase your wariness about them and thus reduce the chance of you running into them. I think at this point, the pace of development of competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Is pretty much non-revertible, and simply just releasing less product wouldn't scale down the problem immensely, I think. Especially since it would mean a real loss of income, and we all know that won't work with any big company in the world. But maybe upping their game in terms of the app, like if cards would be more accessible and more quickly searchable via Neuron, or if there was a tool to analyze game states even. And lastly, just read the cards, bozo. Are you not literate? Can you just not handle a second grade reading lesson? Do you need your mommy to pick you up from school, huh? You big eye looking ass.